so much, Rebecca. Thank you for the Oncrawl team for inviting me. I hope everyone can hear me well. Just a couple of housekeeping stuff. I'm a person who lives with 2 cats and a dog. So if you ever hear barking, meowing, all of these fun stuff, just so you know, I'm not strangling them or anything. It's just the joys of working from home. So with that, we're going to be talking about the 5 phases of NLP. But before that, very important, I wanted to start with something that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. Essentially, something that I think is very important for us to discuss, and why this lecture and why I haven't titled it like 5 phases of AI or something super fancy, because I think it's important for us to distinguish between what is artificial intelligence and what is machine learning, and where does natural language processing fit into that. So as you can see from the definitions on the screen, artificial intelligence is the design and study of systems that appear to demonstrate intelligent behavior, in contrast to machine learning, which is a subset of AI, which is an approach of building applications where models are trained to make predictions. As simple as that. And in the examples, I have provided a couple of examples of both of these systems. So when we are speaking about complete systems, we're talking things like robotics, we're talking things like self-driving cars, we're talking things like recommender systems even, where you have several different models, even hundreds of models in some cases, working in tandem in a system. And this is why whenever you hear something that's AI for SEO or something like that, no, we're not there yet, unfortunately. We will be maybe in some 10 years now or even more. So machine learning, on the other hand, what we're going to talk about today is going to be a subset of that, and we're only going to be featuring models and explaining how they work. Essentially, they are trained on different tasks, but they are showing us predictions on what they think is the right response to the task that we have given them and the text that we have given them to analyze. So machine learning is one part. Regardless of what you see on LinkedIn with ChatGPT being like the end-all be-all of all AI for marketers, it is only a small part of a little bit bigger part of deep learning. So essentially, generative AI is a subset of deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, which is, again, a subset of AI. So I think it's important to start with appropriate definitions. And so where does NLP lie into this? So NLP actually covers a few different areas. You could have deep learning within NLP, natural language processing. It is a part of machine learning, of course, and it can overlap with the data science field as well, as you can see. But it is quite a significant field. It's essentially related to analyzing text with models that, again, are trained on different tasks, but they provide you some score of accuracy, precision when they make predictions on certain tasks and how these tasks can be executed. So it is a subset of AI research concerned with machine learning and text analysis specifically. So we're going to be processing text, which is what makes it so useful for search marketers and SEOs in general. And it's also most recently in the past few decades concerned with the ability of programs to understand human language, both written and spoken, because spoken language is converted to text anyway. And it is also, as we can see in the past few years, it is concerned with generating text, not only understanding it, not only processing it, but also generating it as well, and being giving it a cohesive response. So what I'm trying to say, while it appears that it is, sentient, intelligent, blah, blah, blah. That is not the case. We are still talking and working with different systems that do work on a prediction-based model. So today we're actually going to go through the 5 phases of NLP and how you can utilize them in your SEO projects. Some of these phases are going to be more useful for your work than others, but we will discuss both the applications of these and also how useful they should be and where you should be focusing your attention on whenever you're trying to practice your machine learning skills. So these 5 phases are actually phases of compiler design, which is a subset of software engineering, where essentially computer programs are asked to take a high-level language like the human language and turn it into a low-level language, which is essentially what computer systems work with. That's where those phases come from. So we're actually going to go through all 5 phases: lexical and morphological analysis, syntax analysis, semantic analysis, discourse integration, and pragmatic analysis, going to give examples on how to actually apply these in SEO, what tools to use, what APIs are available. I will be featuring mostly no-code approaches because I know that it's a lot beginner friendly to work with no-code approaches. And then, of course, you can apply all of these APIs in Python and to bigger projects as well. And in the last part, we're actually going to talk about what this means for SEO. So before that, just to quickly say, for those that don't know me, I'm a marketing consultant, trainer, and international speaker. Most recently, I founded MLforSEO, which is an academy for teaching machine learning-enabled automation, specifically for organic search marketers. I've worked with countless teams to test these approaches, implement automation workflows to boost both performance of the websites and the systems that they have, but also for team productivity as well. Besides the academy, besides courses and things like that, I share a ton of resources for free, including all of the resources that are mentioned in this presentation. So if there's anything that you see and you're wondering how to actually get started with this, most likely there will be a blog post on MLforSEO, so definitely go check it out. With that, let's start with lexical analysis. That's the first phase of NLP, and it is concerned with analyzing word structures. So it can be analyzing the lexicon or analyzing morphological kind of compilation of the text. So the lexicon is a collection of words and phrases, and the analysis itself is concerned with splitting it into components based on the parameters that you set as the user. So that could be paragraphs, it could be phrases, it could be characters. And in contrast, morphological analysis is the process of actually analyzing specific words. So here is essentially splitting the word between the component of the word that matters, or otherwise the the free morphem, and then the bound morphem is the part that provides additional context to the word. So kind of like swim or swimming, ing will be the bound morphem and the free morphem will be swim, just as a very quick example. So how to implement this in SEO, and should you implement this in SEO? You can use this for on-page analysis. So for instance, perform a lexical and morphological analysis to understand how often target keywords appear in their core form. So kind of extracting only the semantic importance of these keywords, like the core terms. You can also identify variations, including bound morphemes, free morphemes, and compositions, to actually gain a better understanding of how users refer to certain entities or what's important to them, and how they refer to your products, services, and so on. You can, again, like we talked about content analysis, but you can do the same for your user reviews or any kind of text that you have from users. So reviews, first feedback that you've collected through feedback forms, emails that you have received from them, and so on. You can analyze SERPs with the same kind of methodology, understanding the importance of specific keywords and keyword variations, kind of relating that to rankings. Again, here correlation does not equal causation, which is quite important to note. And you can also do this for keyword research as well. You can evaluate morphemes alongside metrics like search volume or keyword difficulty. And again, it's important to note that the lexical and morphological analysis does not actually uncover that much about semantics. It uncovers only the sentence structure in terms of language structure, right? So, but if you pair that analysis with entity analysis, for instance, which we'll discuss later on in this session, that will make it a little bit more useful. So just to give you an example of how this might work, you might pair this analysis, specifically the morphological analysis, with entity analysis, so that you can see how certain entities are referred to in the text and what kind of different variations there are for a given entity to be referred to by users, just as an example. Tools to use here, Spacey is one library in Python that's quite popular, and Polyglot is another library very popular, which also handles international languages, so it is quite useful if you are trying to decode language structure, sentence structure in international SEO scenarios. So just to kind of also mention, in terms of importance for SEO work, this is the first step in NLP. So as you will see later on, some of these components that we just discussed, for instance, the morphological analysis for entities, they already come with the APIs that we will mention later on. So actually, spending a lot of time on this task might not yield like very good results unless you are trying to analyze sentence structure, maybe trying to improve readability and things like that. But it is the first step. So of course, it's not as useful to implement, or the models that you will be using might not be as complex as the ones that we will see later on in the session. So the second step is syntax analysis. So parsing sentences, checking for grammar, checking for word arrangement, and overall identifying how different words relate to one another and whether the relationships that are identified make sense for the words that are in this sentence. So at this stage, we still don't have any semantic understanding incorporated into the analysis. We just have processing of text with the added complexity of also processing things like syntax and characters that are used and organization of the words. So this process involves examination of just the words, the phrases, but also the structures between them. So similarly to what we will find when we talk about like knowledge graphs, for instance, here, whenever the program is processing a sentence, it's compiling what is referred to as a syntax tree. It essentially shows the different relationships between the words that are analyzed in the sentence. And it also shows what each of the words' role within this sentence is. So in practice, there is a no-code template to do syntax analysis on MLforSEO. It's very beginner-friendly because you can do this in Sheets. But it uses the Google Natural Language API, which is an API that we will mention, I think, 2, 3, 4 times in this lecture, because it's very beginner-friendly, it's very versatile, and it is a Google-owned API. So we could assume that at least in part, some of the systems that Google has would use a similar technology, of course, perhaps more complex or more advanced, but still in some form or another. And that's something that we can validate from patents as well. So essentially, what the syntax analysis module from this API does is that it analyzes syntax in both short snippets of text, think here things like titles or keywords, but it can also analyze longer documents. So it could be things like paragraphs or entire content of web pages. It will split the text into sentences anyway, so it doesn't really matter how long the text that you provide will be. And you can do this kind of analysis for user social comments or page titles or your own content, your competitors' content, just to kind of check whether the structures that you've used in terms of syntax make sense. So the process that you will follow, and this is actually a part that applies with all of the natural language processing API modules that we will discuss, is essentially in order to use the natural language API or any other API from Google Cloud, you have to have 3 prerequisites met. The first one is to have a project. As you can see here from the screen, you can see my project is Cloud NL project from the top left-hand hand. left-hand corner of the screen. And then you add the API, enable the API to this project, and then create an API key. It's very important that in order for the API key to work, you also have to have billing enabled. So just to summarize, you need to have a project, you need to have billing enabled, you need to have the API enabled for this particular project with billing, and then you can create the API key. It sounds complex. I promise it's not. There are step-by-step instructions on the blog post. So once you have the API key, you enter it, and that's the only thing that you need to do in terms of communicating with code, right? So very, very beginner friendly. And then afterwards, you have an ID, which typically we use the URL analysis on titles. Again, you can use the URL as an ID. If you're using something for keyword analysis, make sure you duplicate the keywords in both columns to ensure that the keyword itself is used as an identifier, or same for titles as well. And you paste your content, and once you hit analyzing syntax, it will automatically populate. So there's an additional menu added from the script to mark syntax structure. And so the data that you get essentially is what is the sentence content. So like we said, this splits your text into sentences. It provides tokens for each of the words found, and then it also tags each of these words to say what exactly is this, what is the role of this word in the sentence, is it what's the voice, and so that what's the tense, is it past tense, future tense, and so on. And you can also see the dependency level, which is something that you can use to build the syntax tree we mentioned earlier, lemma, and so on. So you get a ton of data with this. How useful is this data for your SEO work? So this type of analysis can be used to essentially audit content for readability and audit it for syntax errors, structure, essentially to quickly understand the content on your website. What is the tense that it has been written in? Does this align with maybe how competitors are writing for certain topics? Is it written from first person, or is it written from a point of view of we? And this is very useful to also identify syntactic errors and inconsistencies between what is already out there and how you want your brand to be spoken about. So something that Reggie mentioned in the previous session, essentially, if you have a certain brand archetype, you can very quickly check with this whether you are talking, in that kind of form, specifically when it relates to syntax. You can also use this analysis to kind of adapt to brand voice, adjust the tone, complexity, and style to match user preferences. And you can also examine some grammatical errors in maybe user searches if you're analyzing queries, or you can do that for, other richer forms of content, like user reviews, for instance. So this can be also very useful to uncover patterns in keywords. Something that's quite important whenever you're doing keyword research is not only identifying entities, but also identifying the other words that are in certain queries that are not entities, but maybe can show you exactly what kind of content users are seeking to find. So this type of analysis can help you do that, to uncover the patterns whenever an entity is mentioned, what other keywords are there in the sentence, and how are users structuring their queries. Okay, so quick break here. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for putting all the links in the chat. So we are now entering territory where it's important to learn the methods from here onwards, because the first two are arguably not as useful for SEO. Maybe syntax analysis is, because content readability is, and making content written in a way that's accessible for people reading it is. But of course, semantic analysis adds a layer on top of that, which is related to understanding context, understanding real world concepts, understanding sentiment, and all of these different things that make up semantic analysis. So from here onwards, all of the things mentioned would be something for you to pay attention to, for you to implement into processes, and you will get value out of it. So when it comes to semantic analysis, we are now going into the territory of aiming to understand the meaning behind certain statements. So on top of only analyzing words, phrases, and in syntax analysis, analyzing the sentences, we are now also trying to understand not only whether the sentence makes sense structurally, but also whether it makes sense semantically. So whether the certain words that are used are actually, words that are used in a way that relate to concepts, and whether those concepts fit into the structure of the sentence. So this is performed by mapping syntactic structure and checking for logics in the presented relationships. So you have a step that is syntactic analysis, which was the previous step that we discussed. And then now we also have a step for checking in for entities, incorporating a knowledge model, checking for semantics, checking for sentiment as well. All of these things that actually help us to understand whether this sentence makes sense or it doesn't in the real world that we live in. So in terms of no-code tools, again, Google Natural Language API, very beginner friendly, has two models that are very, very useful for any kind of SEO work, and also not even SEO, but like specifically for local SEO, analyzing user reviews, or for e-commerce SEO, analyzing product reviews. These can be extremely useful tools. So there are two templates that you will find on MLforSEO for doing the same thing that we showed in the previous section. Again, no code tools for Google Sheets. And in the entity analysis template, you will be able to identify entities from text and have like robust information about those entities, part of which also includes entity sentiment analysis. So whenever a certain entity is it mentioned in a positive context, like positive sentiment, or is it mentioned with a negative sentiment? And what does that mean for your brand is the question that you need to answer. So for instance, if you're analyzing product reviews and you're seeing that your brand name is mentioned positively, and you're maybe they're comparing with a competitor's brand product, and they're mentioning the competitor brand's name, and they're always saying that your products are better than theirs, that's the kind of feedback that you will get here, that in terms of entity sentiment, that one of the entities is mentioned positively, the other one is mentioned negatively whenever you're analyzing these reviews. And the other template here is the sentiment analysis template, and that actually provides you with a score of the dominant emotion of the entire content piece. And when I say content piece, that could be a page that your brand is mentioned in. It could be a user review that someone has left on a product or a service that you offer. So essentially taking the entire document and analyzing the sentiment for it, providing an overarching score. So that's the difference between the two. So I'll give you an example for the entity extraction. Again, associated blog post, associated template. Again, we have a very similar structure. We have the URL as the ID and the content. We click on the menu at the top, wherever it says sentiment tools. Once it starts processing, we will know that the execution has started, and we will also have like a visual cue for each of these texts being processed, because it will say that the entity sentiment is complete. And then in the other sheet of this template, you can see the ID, which is our URL. Within each content piece, the entities that have been found from the content, the type of entity that it is. So you will see whether it's an organization, if it's a person, if it's an event or another type of entity. You can see the salience, which is essentially importance of the entity in the context of wherever it's been identified. So for the document itself, And you can also see things like sentiment score, sentiment magnitude. Again, this is at an entity level, which sentiment score is whether it's positive or negative, and magnitude is how strong the sentiment that it has been identified is. And then you also have the number of mentions overall for this entity, metadata, which it could include things like Wikipedia links or knowledge graph identification. And it also has the mentions. So this is actually the column where we talked about in the previous part, where you have some cues about, in the syntax of the sentence, how many times does this entity appear, and what are the variations where it has been mentioned. And so, for instance, Barack Obama could be mentioned like Mr. Obama, former president, or Barack, and this will actually highlight all of the different references of this entity in the text, which is, again, very, very useful. And when it comes to sentiment analysis, again, different blog posts, but the process is quite similar. The script is a lot more simpler in terms of you just have a formula and you just drag it down. And essentially you have categories that you can actually go into the code and adjust. But these are, some generic names based on the amplitudes that I have found. And then actually you can visualize this. So you can visualize, in this example here, sentiment score and magnitude of titles that mention a certain brand. And you can do the same for meta descriptions. So this can be useful for whenever you're partnering or trying to improve your brand profile. You're partnering with different websites, just monitoring the coverage that they're giving you related to your brand. And you can also kind of filter out, based on this data, to filter out and identify publications that speak positively about your brand, or maybe some that speak negatively. So in this example, we have both of them mixed, but using the filters, you can actually filter down and see the ones that have negative coverage for you. And that's just one example of visualizing the data. So should you implement this in SEO, and what are the projects that you can implement this in? Whenever you're doing keyword research, a ton of resources, and it's quite a top of mind topic for me, especially with the course that I've recently built on keyword research and kind of incorporating semantics into it. First step is identifying entities from your keywords. Then you can cluster keywords based on different methods and different characteristics. You can cluster keywords based on just the n-grams. So for instance, all the keywords that contain how-to, all the keywords that are question-based, all of the keywords that contain a certain entity, or like your brand, for instance, or whatever else it may be. So very rudimentary type of analysis. And then you can take this a step further and actually cluster keywords based on semantics, using methods like S-word, for instance, or even BERT topic, just to do modeling of these terms. And you can also take it a step further and actually see from the entities that you have identified from those keywords, you can also see which of those actually are part of the knowledge graph, how important they are in the real world context, which of them you should prioritize because maybe they relate very closely to your brand, and how you can actually relate this to patterns that keywords are that people are using in their keywords queries that they type in Google search, and actually where those entities appear and how important they are, how people refer to them, and so on. So definitely a lot of different implementations for this type of analysis and keyword research. You can also do topic modeling, clustering, classification of content. Again, while we didn't discuss this in detail, text classification would also fall into semantic analysis. So identifying labels for content in general. And this is actually the fourth module for the same API. So even if you have just one API that you need to test out after this presentation, definitely choose this one because it's super beginner friendly and you can do a ton of things with it. But you can also do topic modeling even if you don't have labels and you don't really understand the structure of the content. So you're just trying to actually group the content together based on what the content itself covers as topics. So you can do this with BERT topic, or you can do this with LDA. For both of these, there are no-code resources, and ways to get started. And why you might want to do this is we've talked about the importance of internal links in the first session today. As Crystal and the other guests mentioned, we've talked about how important your site messaging is, and having a consistent way that you refer to your products, to your services, and a consistent tone with which you speak to users in the second session. So these are actually the tools now that can help you to put this into action at scale, to identify maybe some pitfalls where your website isn't really talking to users in the way that you have planned in your brand guide or in your brand strategy, and actually identifying maybe some discrepancies between what your strategy is and what your content actually represents, so you can actually dig in and do on-page optimization. So we're at the fourth stage, which is discourse integration. So essentially this means contextualizing the content itself. So we are now analyzing and identifying larger context, not only the context that is found within the text, so something that's explicitly mentioned, but also the context that is inferred from that particular structure of words, and also from the particular references of entities. So again, we're analyzing the word structure, we're analyzing the sentence structure, we're extrapolating semantics, and now we're also adding external context into this analysis. So when we're analyzing the structure of text sentences, they will be broken up, and we're also considering the context of sentences that precede and follow them, and also additional context that might be added from something like a knowledge graph, for instance. So some tasks that are included in this phase, but this is not at all an exhaustive list, would be things like information extraction, conversation analysis, summarizing text or expanding text based on knowledge that exists elsewhere. It could be things like discourse analysis and things like that. So how to do this in practice? We're only going to talk about a couple of methods. So the first one is content moderation, which is essentially discourse analysis. We are going to analyze text, and we're going to extract from it some of the themes that are mentioned, right? And whether those themes align with one of the categories that are flagged as categories to be moderated or not. And the model is going to give us a prediction. Does it align with one of those categories, or it doesn't? So there are several content sources that can be useful for moderation. It could be things like user-generated content, like comments that people leave on your website. It could be social comments. It could be titles of your content, or on titles of third-party mentions of your brand. It could be content that you have written, or user reviews, emails that users have left you, and so on. So again, template on MLforSEO, super beginner friendly, but let me show you why this is important. Essentially what the model, like I said, what it does is you have your text on the left-hand side, you have the categories which the model has been trained to recognize. So it analyzes the text, it analyzes the discourse, it applies additional knowledge on what these categories mean in real world context. So when we're talking about things like toxic content, what does this mean for our, our world, right? The way that we speak. What does violent content mean? What does health-related content mean? So it adds that additional context into the analysis, and what you get is these lovely prediction scores, which you can color code as a marketer, because we love our little color-coded spreadsheets. And you can actually see for your entire content library, for your entire user review library, which of these are perfectly fine, perfectly safe, brand safe content, and which of these are like, okay, I have to actually look into this because it looks like this contains profanity, or it contains some insults, and I don't want that to be associated with my brand, right? So let's dig into those. And something that's also very, very important for SEO is actually that Google uses these classifications for categorizing topics that are your money or your life. So I'm quoting from Lily Ray here, who is, of course, as she does, referencing Google's resources and being like a great source of information. So as she says, like examples of your money or your life topic based on Google's own search quality guidelines are things that can impact a person's happiness, health, financial stability, or safety. So now if you look at the categories from the API that Google has developed, released, and so on, we can actually see these 4 categories, right? So we can see safety, like public safety, firearms, violent content, and so on. We can see health-related topics as well. We can see financial stability, like politics, finance, legal topics. And we can also see happiness-related topics or things that can actually influence you. And some of these, as you can probably tell, they overlap. So it's not just one category, but for instance, profanity content, toxic content, that can impact both your life and your your happiness and your health in terms of mental health, right? So, but all of these categories, when taken together, can actually give you a very good picture of whether your content can be categorized whenever it's processed through an automated system for text analysis, whether it can be categorized as your money or life or not. So this is a very good quick check to see whether the way that you have phrased certain things, the way that you have referred to certain concepts might be actually not a very brand safe way to do that. And that's only talking about the content that you have on your site. But of course, this is a lot useful whenever you're doing forum analysis, whenever you are moderating a community that's related to your brand, whether you are monitoring your employer brand comments or whatever else it may be. So moving on to another application, social media mentions and external mentions. This can be something that can be paired with social media comment scraping or comment analysis software, and you can actually monitor how people are referring to your brand. And of course, imagine if you pair that also with the sentiment analysis, so you will have an identification and a score for each of the comments, each of the brand mentions that you receive, whether it is toxic or not, what topic it contains from the important ones that we just talked about, and also whether it's positive, negative, does it contain your brand entity, does it contain a competitor brand entity, and all of these things. So very, very useful way of combining all of these different tools we talked about. And of course, we already mentioned on-site and community content. So now we're in the last phase, pragmatic analysis. So this is where we actually enter things like extrapolating and incorporating learnings from all of the other phases. So we have the additional context, we have the semantics, we have the syntax, we have the word analysis, and now we're also adding the additional knowledge of pragmatics, right? Like here we're talking about things like information extraction, being able to answer questions, and being able to incorporate and understanding a combination of different contexts. So for instance, in the example here in the sentence, can you pass the salt? If you're asking that sentence to a computer program, the computer program, and as you can probably tell, this is the stage where we will mention chatbots like ChatGPT, generative AI, LLMs, and so on, because that's the phase that they're operating in. They're incorporating all of the different elements from different stages, and they are trained to actually give you an accurate response when it comes to the language that they're generating, whether they can pass you the salt, right? So you will find something like, as a large language model, I cannot do that because I'm not physically in the room present with you, blah, 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 blah. So it has to actually analyze the context of that sentence. It has to understand that the salt is an entity. The context of passing the salt means that there's 2 people sitting on the table. Both of these people have arms. They can reach to the salt. They can get it. It's a time-sensitive request, and so on. So all of these different analyses are now taking place into this one model, and this one model is actually giving you an appropriate response. So it extracts meaning, it extracts the context, and it also has a conversational function as well added to that. So when it comes to tools and practices, ChatGPT, Gemini, very good examples of this technology being implemented. Of course, I don't need to be here telling you all of the different 15,000 applications of Gemini or ChatGPT into marketing. What I will say is that if you are trying to do a very specific task like analyzing entities, they are not the best tools to do that, because there is a more focused model specifically trained for this task, right? And they are actually trained to generate text. That's what they're trained to do. And of course, they still have some of these analysis as mentioned, but it's not like an end-all solution. And especially whenever you are trying to do some on-page analysis or trying to see the search volume of keywords, that's absolutely not the right tool to use, because this is, at the end of the day, an LLM, generative AI. So it's just doesn't have the access to knowledge that will give you that response accurately, right? But this is essentially a kind of the context of how things work when it comes to like pragmatic analysis. Some example that we gave earlier, like the facts that are interfered, like relationships between different entities, how they relate to one another, additional context related to those entities, and so on, to be able to actually answer a certain question. So when it comes to applying this in SEO, we already do part of this type of analysis when we are marking up our content with schema, marking up events, of course, a lot more robust and niche schemas that we are applying, the more context that we are providing, and that helps. So when it comes to implementation in SEO, I highly recommend checking out the work that WordLift does, because they are essentially mixing in knowledge graph information, all of these different specialized machine learning models, and also adding the conversational function and building that kind of agentic, AI or kind of conversational agent to actually be able to address questions, but address them with additional context that is SEO related and not just generated from scratch without actually having the knowledge and data to fall back on. So one other application is, of course, converting text. And this is where LLMs shine, right? This is where what they have been trained to do. And there are so many different ways to do text conversions. I'm shouting out always Caitlin Hathaway's repurposing a bot, because I think it's a great example of this. So if you have blog posts, but you don't really have a good content distribution, you can actually create tweets, LinkedIn posts, and so on, YouTube descriptions, just from, providing the text of that blog post to a chatbot like Gemini or ChatGPT. And that's what they are actually trained to do. They're trained to convert text, understand the context of what LinkedIn is, what Twitter is, and so on, and actually give you something that is very useful for you. And you can do the same by asking it to rewrite blog posts to newsletter editions, or with the case of Gemini, you can upload a PDF and ask it to create a landing page for that PDF, for instance, which is a great use case for an LLM. And I also want to shout out Elias Dabas and his contribution for LM4SEO. LM4SEO, ML4SEO. So he actually gave an example of how to use generative AI in combination with structured data, something that we mentioned that WordLift already does. But this is just something that you can do with the code that he has added. So essentially, imagine if you have a database with certain products and characteristics of these products, you can actually create a prompt template and fill in the different data points into the prompt templates can then create product descriptions at scale using the data that already exists in your database. So this is a great way to reduce hallucinations and to also create at scale product descriptions or titles or whatever other, text components that you need. So essentially having that content transformation component. So you could do that for an individual product description or rating. And you can also do it from another point of view of taking the product description and summarizing what it says, so extracting different components. But you can also do that for your entire product catalog, for instance, and to actually do that for your brand. So our users, based on all of the comments that we've analyzed, love about our brand these 5 things, for instance, or here's how these 5 things relate to different user reviews. And they should, the LLM in this case, would be able to pick up not direct mentions, but will be able to kind of extract a little bit more of the context as mentioned. So in terms of practical implications, there are now tools that are advanced in all of these categories. So there's no excuse for you not to automate certain components of your work. That doesn't mean, however, that you can replace yourself entirely, or in some cases, even building like a very complex end-to-end system is possible, but it's not really recommended because you, the human brain and the intelligence are needed to fill the gaps that exist in the models that are there. So, but still, you should absolutely automate some of these components. And because we all know now, Google, and not only Google, but other platforms like social media platforms with search functions, I'm talking TikTok, I'm talking YouTube, are automating their systems and relying heavily on machine learning for ranking content, for moderating content, for tagging the chapters in your videos and whatever. Not using the same machine learning models that they're using to complete these tasks is definitely leaving you blindsided, in my personal opinion, when it comes to understanding the text, the videos, the content that you are working with. Because yes, absolutely, we should be optimizing for users first, but we should also not leave ourselves blindsided, whether, the bots, machines that are processing this text are actually understanding the content itself. And this is all related to text analysis, right? What we talked about in this lesson. And using NLP tools, of course, can help you ensure that every piece of content meets high standards of the users themselves. We're talking things like readability, grammatical accuracy, tone, whether it is a good user experience and no harmful topics have been discussed, and whether it provides, a very quick, digestible way of consuming that information as well. I think I also had one point in my slides, which was about whenever we are adding the complexity of LLMs as well, it is very easy to think that there's one particular tool, one particular API or machine learning model that can help us in doing everything. But hopefully this session has shown you that there is a lot, and we're only just scratching the surface, a lot of different machine learning models that you can use. They're all very beginner friendly, and you will get a ton more data by using a specialized model and a specialized API as opposed to using something that is trained for a generic purpose or not trained for the purpose that you're trying to do. So what I'm trying to say is, with added complexity in our industry, we should also be open to adding a little bit of complexity in our roles as well, and embracing the a little bit more technical component of understanding our websites as well, as opposed to just relying on our own abilities to process the content. So where to go from here? Shamelessly plugging the tutorials that we have created myself alongside with other expert contributors. All of the tutorials are step-by-step instructions, so they're quite digestible and easy to follow along with. And the implementation guides actually combine different approaches for completing the same task that actually allows you to see benefits and limitations of different approaches. And hopefully with time, as you practice machine learning skills more, you'll be able to understand, not only the theory behind some of these models, but also why some might be more suitable for a certain task than others. And of course, the templates are super beginner friendly and require no code for you to get started with. There's also courses and an academy for those that really want to upskill in that area as well. So definitely check it out. And with that, I'm very sorry that I have taken all of this time for questions. I don't know, Rebecca, if we do have any questions, but hopefully it has been an enjoyable session for you all.
My goodness, Lazarina, you do it every single time. It felt like this took 5 minutes, and at the same time,
that's good. That's good.
I think I'm going to need a few minutes to digest, and if everyone else is like me, that might explain why we don't currently have any questions. If we do have a few, we can take a few minutes, 5 or 6,
absolutely,
to cover any last-minute questions that other people have. But otherwise, thank you so much for everyone who attended today. And thank you, Lazarina. That was exceptional. I wish I'd caught all of the references. I tried to get a bunch, but missed some of them. I know they'll come up in your blog post later.
Everything is in the slides. All of the links are there. Please don't stress. I know how stressful it can be to actually be live and trying to learn things live. So yeah, basically everything is in the slides, and I'm always available to share tips on how to implement these templates or the code or anything if you just message me on LinkedIn. So my public handle is at Lazarina Stoy for anyone that's interested. So anytime you're working on a machine learning project, I'd love to hear about it and see if I can help, or if not, if I can learn from you, because there's so many people doing amazing stuff in this area. So if we can collaborate, I'm sure we'll all help each other to be better at this.
So your handle is at the bottom of all of the slides. You are easy to find on LinkedIn, and you've shared multiple times the MLforSEO, which is a good place to find you at the moment. So that's going to conclude our session for today. Thank you so much, Lazarina. This was exceptional. And if you're looking for more at We Love SEO today, you can join us for our next session. We'll take a break for about an hour, and then we'll have Nikki Hallowell on decoding the language of devs. If you're not signed up yet, there is a link in the chat now for that. So thank you very much, and see everybody soon.
Thank you. Bye.